local election headquarters. This is Politics Today with Jackie Kingston.
Tensions remain high across the world as Russia invades Ukraine. Coming up, how the situation will impact us here locally. And Governor Greg Abbott wants to classify gender transition procedures as child abuse. We'll tell you how he's attempting to do so. The world is watching as Russia continues to invade Ukraine. Thanks for joining us this morning. Starting Wednesday night and continuing through this weekend, Ukraine has been hit with airstrikes on cities and military bases as Russia sends in troops and tanks from 3 different sides of that country. NATO has increased personnel support for Ukraine. The United States is imposing sanctions on Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin ignoring global condemnation and unleashing the largest ground war in Europe since World War II. Putin threatened any foreign country trying to interfere with, quote, consequences you have never seen. Several thousand Ukrainians have crossed into neighboring countries. Tens of thousands have fled their homes and are uprooted in the country after Russia's invasion. So how will the invasion of Ukraine impact people in the U.S. and more specifically us here on the High Plains? Politics Today's Judd Baker has a breakdown of what we can expect.
Defending freedom will have cost.
President Biden acknowledging Tuesday the U.S. could see impacts from the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
I'm going to take robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy, not ours.
With the invasion now underway, what might those impacts look like?
The first and most obvious thing is going to be oil prices.
Assistant professor of political science at West Texas A&M University, Dr. Christopher McCulley, says oil prices already rose out of fears from the invasion.
Europe gets a very significant portion of its oil and gas directly from Russia. There's 3 pipelines. One goes through Ukraine. Very good chance we see the Ukrainian one either damaged or shut down in the coming weeks, which means that European oil and gas is going to be impacted pretty much no matter what. The result of all this is oil and gas prices will go up in the United States.
Americans could also feel the pain at the grocery store. Ukraine is considered the breadbasket of Europe. Therefore, the continent could have its wheat and grain supply stressed.
If that supply is cut off from the Europeans, they're going to have to get it somewhere else. America is going to be asked to fill the gap in a lot of those things.
Dr. McCulley says another thing that complicates all of this is a weakened global supply chain.
The supply chain is still wrought with delays and wrought with problems. That means that Europe's ability to pivot to new sources of either agricultural products or oil is very, very hamstrung. And the result of that is going to be prices are going to go up more than they normally would and take longer to settle back into their sort of pre-conflict prices.
So there are other things on the list like cyber attacks. Sectors of the U.S. economy could be hurt by sanctions implemented by the president. Dr. McCauley says there will be a lot of information on social media. There already is on this invasion, and he warns that some of it will be misinformation. You can read more on how to sort through all of the information during this crisis on our website, myhighplains.com. We'll continue to follow those geopolitical developments and the United States involvement, but we do want to move to some local stories now. The Amarillo City Council voted last week to approve an economic development agreement providing incentives for a project to turn the historic St. Anthony's building into a senior living facility. It'll be the first one on the north side of town. Assistant City Manager Andrew Friedman says the city's incentives include property tax rebates for 10 years, waivers of their building permits, and also $1,050,000 of American Rescue Plan funding to support the project. The city's contributions will total nearly $1.3 million. Freeman says the building has been vacant for years and the city has dealt with issues like vandalism and fires.
So it is an ongoing challenge for public safety to deal with the current state of the building. What we hope with a $30 million investment on the eastern portion, that will just trigger and be a catalyst for even more development surrounding that area and hopefully the western end of the property.
The city's motion is contingent on Potter County approving their funding of this project. That is on tomorrow morning's agenda, a story that we'll continue following for you. The Amarillo City Council approving an economic agreement with Cavanis Beef Packers as well. And this comes after Cavanis began to build a new facility on South Washington Street. In the agreement, Cavanis can receive $1 million from the Amarillo Economic Development Corporation for the creation of 100 new full-time jobs over the next 5 years. The City Council also awarded contracts to replace playground equipment in 10 parks all across the city. That motion passed 5-0. According to the Parks and Rec Board, some of the parks in need of equipment include Stephen F. Austin Park, Will Rogers Park, and Hines Memorial Park. Altogether, those projects total more than $1.4 million. Last week, Governor Greg Abbott directed the Department of Family Protective Services to investigate reports of gender transitioning procedures for minors. He says it's an effort to protect the mental and physical well-being of those kids. And now DFPS is instructed to investigate the administration of puberty-blocking drugs, doses of testosterone or estrogen, and reassignment surgeries for kids. Harris County Attorney Christian Menefee, who represents DFPS in civil child abuse cases, doesn't think those procedures qualify as abuse. He says his office will not be taking up any case brought to DFPS alleging abuse related to gender-affirming care.
It's not a situation where you have kids that are being intentionally harmed by their parents or by their medical providers. These are situations where you have trans kids who are receiving gender-affirming health care.
Even if an attorney does not take a case up, investigations by DFPS will still happen. DFPS says it has not launched any investigations of those types just yet. As Election Day draws closer, we're highlighting some of the candidates you'll see on the ballot. Coming up, we'll show you our exclusive interviews with the candidates for Senate District 31 after State Senator Kel Seliger announced his plans to retire. I'm Jackie Kingston. You're watching Politics Today from your local election headquarters. State Senator Kel Seliger announced his retirement after nearly 2 decades of service, and currently there are 4 candidates on the ballot in these primaries to fill that seat. I sat down with each of them. I'm going to air them in order alphabetically, starting with candidate Stormy Bradley. Take a listen.
I want to ask you, first off, just what inspired you to run for Senate? Why did you decide that now was the time and this was the race?
A few reasons, actually. So I really planned on doing this because I was tired of the lack of action and stagnation, if you will. I'm not the kind of person that maintains the status quo. I've been a business owner since I was 19, and so I know what it takes to be ambitious and make things happen. I'm ready to stand up and fight for the citizens of Texas. I think we got a lot of people standing around, keeping our borders open, raising our taxes, allowing unconstitutional mandates to be placed on us. And we need doers and fighters to protect the citizens. We need people with accountability and integrity. And I feel that I'm led to do this.
You talked about being a business owner since you were 19. If people are unfamiliar kind of with your story, what are some of the things that you have done and accomplished in your life that you think have prepared you for this role?
Well, I grew up in a small town, Wickett, population 355 at the time. I'm not sure what it is now, probably less than that. I grew up in a pretty troubled home. I had abusive family members in my home. And so, I knew I didn't want to live that life. And anyway, I decided I was going to go to law school, and I was going to school in San Angelo, met my husband, and he said, "You're wasting your money. Don't go to law school, do something and then use it to pay for law school instead of going into debt." So instead, I went to nursing school, got my nursing license. I've been a nurse for 11 years now. And in that, to pay for nursing school, we started a construction company. That was in 2009 when we started that business. And today I have a steel construction company that we started in 2009. And then I also have another business, Bulldog Steel. So I have a manufacturing plant such as Mueller or Metal Mart. I mean, a lot of people know those businesses. So that's the type of steel businesses that I own. Fast forward to today, I run and operate 2 businesses. I'm married. I have 2 little boys. I serve on my hospital board and my school board, as well as my chamber board back home and a museum board.
There is more of that interview available for you on myhighplains.com. Continuing now to look at our candidates for Senate District 31. Next is Jesse Quackenbush.
What drew you to this race and to this potential election?
Well, I've been interested in politics my entire life. I majored in political science. I've been a lawyer for 34 years. So naturally, I'm involved in politics on a daily basis with my work. But what intrigued me and got my interest in this particular office, in this particular race, was the fact that Mr. Seliger was leaving after 17 years of service. It sort of came about suddenly and unexpectedly, and I think had a lot of people off guard and not ready to find a replacement. So, after talking with a few Republican leaders here in town to try to figure out if anybody was planning on stepping up so that we had a voice in the Panhandle, I learned pretty quickly that nobody was ready for this and no one was prepared to step up, at least at that time. And so I decided to jump in the race because the alternative is going to be a voice from Midland, Odessa that has very little interest in the Panhandle of Texas. So I thought it was important that the Panhandle continue to have a voice, a united voice for all the people, and also to protect our interests here. And I can get into more of that later, but primarily our water interests here from people from downstate. I've always been interested in protecting our water. And when I ran for this office 17 years ago, there was a man named T. Boone Pickens who was trying to take our water. So, I felt very firmly, and I still feel very firmly, that unless someone from the Panhandle gets this job, that the frackers that Mr. Sparks represents in Midland, Odessa will be up here taking our vital resource, which could drag us into a spiral which we can't recover from. Without water, our agricultural community, our cattle community can't survive. So I jumped into the race to make sure that people understood just how important and how vital it is that we continue to have a voice from the Panhandle in the state Senate.
I want to ask you about a topic that's come up in the past couple of days, and it's the regard that perhaps the leaders in our state and our lieutenant governor or governor may have for the outgoing Senator Seliger, and what effect that his comments on redistricting this Senate seat may have moving forward. What kind of effect do you think that has as far as influence or power or control that we might have taken away from us?
Well, I think that it's very important that Panhandle voters and voters in the entire Senate District 31 understand the background of what happened, what actually has happened. Now, Mr. Seliger, in my opinion, very honorably and very in a very fantastic fashion represented the Panhandle for 17 years. I think he did a fantastic job, a great job. Always people can do better, but I think he did a great job in distributing the power, in other words, his decision-making to all of the people as opposed to just a few of the people. Well, that irked a couple people downstate because he wasn't far enough right for Greg Abbott and he wasn't far enough right for Dan Patrick. And they started a verbal shouting match amongst each other where Mr. Seliger apparently had told Mr. Patrick's secretary to kiss his butt or something like that. And Mr. Seliger refused to apologize. And therein started this groundswell of attack against Mr. Seliger in the 31st District.
That full interview available for you unedited on myhighplains.com. We'll continue with more of our Texas Senate District 31 candidates right after this. Next, as we continue to hear more from our candidates for Senate District 31, is Tim Reid. Here's part of my exclusive interview with him.
Okay, Mr. Reid, tell me about the reason why you decided to get into this race and to run for a state Senate.
Well, in my career with the FBI, I had worked with two of our U.S. reps and also with some of the state representatives here in Amarillo on criminal matters that their offices got involved in. And so for the last 30 years, I've been contemplating getting into the political end of things. And I actually, in the things I did in my career, I took those assignments so that I would have a varied background, so that I would have the qualifications to run for office.
And so when this opportunity, I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to go into. When this seat opened up, when Kel decided not to run, it's something that my wife and I contemplated for a couple months, and just speaking to people here in town and in the Panhandle, decided if I was going to do it, this would be a good time, and that I had the experience and background to be a state senator.
I want to ask you, I think that when people hear about somebody who has experience working with the FBI, it is not only terrifying to hear, but also, really intriguing. And people who maybe aren't as familiar with law enforcement aren't as familiar with what might go into that. So what are those qualifications that you think that your training there helps you and would help you and you would bring into this office?
Well, I did 32 years in law enforcement. 28 of them were with the FBI, and that role is a public servant role. You do take an oath to uphold the Constitution and to protect the country, and I took that oath very seriously, and so I think that is probably the biggest qualification is being that public servant, because the representative, when you look at the size of this district, 45 counties, that goes from the Oklahoma-Texas Panhandle all the way down to Schleicher County. That's a huge area, mostly rural, and the people in this area are looking for someone who can be a voice for them because they can't be in Austin. And so I think that's the number one qualification, being a public servant and having that servant's heart.
To watch more of my interview with Tim Reid, go to myhighplains.com. We have one final candidate for Texas Senate District 31 to highlight right after this. Finally today, in our pool of candidates for Senate District 31, my interview with Kevin Sparks. Here's what he had to say before Election Day when I spoke with him last week. What inspired you to run? Why did you decide to take up this cause and to take on this campaign right now?
Well, so my wife Jill and I have been involved in Texas politics now for more than 20 years, but we've spent most of our time really on the policy side. So in my 30s, I was involved in a bipartisan group called the Texas Lyceum that but basically goes around the state 4 times a year and looks at the different issues facing the state and benefits around the state, and then has debate on best practices. And then later on, she and I became involved in the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And so we spent quite a few years where we've helped kind of behind the scenes on helping craft good conservative policy for the state of Texas. I thought that was really, we were doing our part. I got contacted last summer by some political patriot friends and asked if I would consider running for this position. And as we kind of prayed through it, we couldn't come up with a good enough excuse to say no.
I wonder, with all that policy experience that you have in working with the Texas Public Policy Foundation and the Lyceum, what are some of those issues that you've learned about that you'll continue to press for if you are elected, and what are some of your new ideas that you would bring to this office?
Yeah, so obviously I kind of put them in a couple of different categories. You have those that are on the forefront of everybody's mind, which are very time sensitive, like the border. And I know people are really concerned about what's happening down on the border. I had the opportunity to go down there about 5 weeks ago and get a briefing firsthand. And that is a critical issue. And the state's got to do everything it can, because our federal government has abdicated its responsibility to protect our citizens here. And it's a critical issue that obviously the state is putting forth quite a few resources towards slowing the flow of illegal people coming across the border, as well as all of the sex trafficking, the drug imports, everything else that's going along with the calamity down there. So those are things that we've got to address immediately.
To watch my full interview with Kevin Sparks, go to our website, myhighplains.com. That almost does it for us here on Politics Today. A little more to talk with you about after this. All right, that is going to do it for us this week's here on Politics Today. Remember, Election Day is Tuesday. That night, we're having a special edition of this show, Politics Today, right here on KAMR Local 4 after the news at 6. So join us for that. Special guests, full coverage, you know, the whole nine. We're blowing it up. It's a big election for us. Go to myhighplains.com to follow along with all of our coverage throughout the week. Follow us on social media. I'm on Facebook and on Twitter as well. In-depth coverage of all the races on our website. See you Tuesday.